Yo, 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 check it, check it. Yo, yo, yo. Bring this mic a little closer. Yo, yo. What's up? I'm Sephiros, and today I'm going to be showing you some things that I've been playing around with to make gnarly, distorted D&B basses. And yeah, let's get into it. So, you may be familiar with the classic Reese bass, but if you are not familiar with the classic Reese bass, you can check out my tutorial on Reese bass. I can show you real quick the sound of a Reese bass or Reese of any type. This is just played down low. It's when you detune two waves. It's a great sound, and it has this rhythm to it that changes depending on the note played. Oops, I was hella clipping. But yeah, whatever. So let me show you the kind of patch that I've been building lately. And this is kind of a cool sound. So here's a phase plant preset that I have where it's just like some noise and a sub. And it sounds like this. I'm actually going to replace that with a normal filter. So just a sine wave sampled from the Moog and some analog noise sampled from the Moog. And you can do this with any noise and any sine wave. So basically the idea here, if I play up an octave, if I take two sine waves, I can make kind of that beating sound, which is phase cancellation. And I really like that sound. It's different if you just put an LFO to the volume. It has this certain type of sound that sounds warm and kind of juicy. So I like that played down low in the sub. So like sub phase cancellation bass. Now don't worry, there's still plenty of sub coming through. I'll show you on a Pro Cue. Plenty of consistent sub. So don't worry, you can totally use two subs at once, played at the same time, and it's totally cool. So I really like distorting this sound. But the first thing I like to do with this patch is I like to take a macro and then map it to control the tuning by a couple semitones. Let's just do two semitones positive, and then on this other one, I'll go the opposite way. So pull down on my mouse and make this little arrow go minus 2, 2.09, 2.09. So then I can use this macro to control the speed of that wobble, which is really cool when I'm playing little melodies. So the basic idea with like a Noisia type or like a Cohen sound type Reese bass is a series of filtration and distortion. So I'll get like a nice analog model distortion out here. I'm going to use the decapitator, and I'll just hit punish. I'll just pick a distortion tone that I like. And so now we have more harmonics. So I'll get a Pro Q out again and show you the harmonics. And then I like to use like a little bit more digital of a saturator, like M saturator. Something that's going to have a harder clip to it and less dynamic. So I'll get this out. And then I'm going to use this Pro Q to start controlling the sound. So I'm going to write a quick little bass line here. And the cool thing about that double sub thing is when you pitch bend notes, like this, the rhythm changes. So we can get like a little pitch bending going on. All I have to do in the patch is just go to enable legato and put the polyphony to 1. And side note for phase plant, a lot of times it'll, if you open up a preset in your default set, sometimes this polyphony won't work until you reset it. So it's good to reset it. And then let's just do like 100 milliseconds of glide. And then I can get a little bit of a Reese bass line going on here. And another cool thing about having 2 subs playing at once is you can have like a different decay on each and a different attack on each, so you can kind of like stagger the attack, and it gives this kind of cool pitch character to it. So give like one a little bit longer of an attack and release. So once I have a bass line, I can then be more intentional with how I start to filter it. So I might start by just doing a bit of a notch. Maybe not a full notch, just a bell. And we can start to automate the frequency. So I'll click the frequency, open up the automation, and we can start playing around with this. And then, so that looks like this. And maybe it's cool to keep this a little bit lower, so we could maybe just move this down a bit more so it's less phasey and more like messing with the sub. I want to start messing with the sub volume there. And another thing I'm going to do is just turn this to linear phase, so that's a little bit cleaner. So we can also then create a peak filter and automate the frequency of that. Sorry, I'm mega clipping. I'm going to adjust the analog here on the M saturator and the threshold just to be a little bit gentler at the 0 dB. So that's just going to clip stuff that goes over 0, and then I'll turn my OBS volume down slightly so I'm not clipping. It can be useful to have some sort of compressor or limiter involved here. So I'll get us out a glue compressor, just to kind of control the dynamics a bit, because all that filtering. So that gives us a little bit more movement. Another thing I like to have is actually a high pass filter. So on the Pro Q, if I just click below the line, double click, it'll give me a high pass filter. And I can just automate that a little bit. And then more distortion. So it's just kind of an iterative process of this distortion, and then more filtering, and then more distortion, and kind of doing a little bit every time. So I'll try this rectifier, mess around with trash a little bit. So I really like this sound because it sounds still like a Reese because it's got that rhythm to it, but it doesn't sound like a Reese because it doesn't sound like that ripping sound. It sounds like really warm and round and stuff. So yeah, we can maybe put an amp. I feel like an amp really brings out the highs nicely. So I guess an Ableton amp. And it's all about finding that point where the sound falls apart and then just dialing it back a bit and then going further in the next process. So the next thing I can do is an OTT-like effect with a multiband wave shaper. You can get a kind of an OTT-like effect where those highs sound like they're being sustained, like there's something pushing the highs. And all the frequencies for that matter to different degrees because we have a multi-band here. So I'll use like a 3-band and then just do fully wet on all the bands and then start to control the amount that we're pushing those quieter frequencies. So I'll make a point and then another point, and I can start pushing stuff that's like minus 24 dB and quieter. I can start pushing that up like this. So somewhere along this chain, we can start to introduce a bit of time-based effect to add a bit of stereo image. So I might get like a convolution reverb and just put it somewhere, maybe after this trash and before the amp. And then I'll group it and do a split rack where I'll put this reverb, or not a split rack, I'm sorry, just a parallel rack. I'll put the reverb in its own chain fully wet and then EQ it a bit so that we can control it a bit post. And maybe a tiny reverb here. This is a multi-band plugin, so we could maybe do 2 bands. And on the bottom band, maybe a room, and on the top band, something a little more experimental. So let's start by just listening to the whole sound and messing with the bands. I'm going to do fully wet on the bands. And there's some cool things in this early reflections. Sometimes these sound cool. We can also keep that little added bit of warmth on the low mids while controlling the stereo image by doing a bit of bass mono here up to like 350 so that we're monoing out the reverb. So we could call this our stereo adder. Stereo edition. And then we can also automate this to be more, to add more movement. So maybe some delay could be cool as well, like a grain delay. And again, I'll set the dry wet fully wet and then start to macro some things up like the time, the feedback, the chain volume. I'll call this grain gain. And the spray could be cool. So now I can kind of turn the grain gain all the way down and just have it come in at points. Like right here on this little growl, I could have it come in maybe a little bit. And then I could have it fill in this gap, maybe. So that's cool, but it is a good idea to EQ that so that we're not doing a bunch of weird sub delays. So I'll just have that be like some extra high sauce, maybe even give it a little boost on the highs. And then maybe automate the delay time at the same time. So I'll right click here and add lane for each automated envelope so that I can see the grain gain. So I'll move the grain gain up so that I can kind of follow this with the time. And then playing with the pitch can help you get a little more separation out of that grain layer. And following this same idea, we can put another Pro Cue down here. And we can make a pretty cool bandpass filter with the Pro Cue. If we make a bandpass filter like so, and then configure the frequency of both of these bands. I'll call this bandpass. And then we just have to go into the mapping. So I'll click map. And then I can play with this and look at, okay, so maybe I want a little bit more room here. So I can move this down like this and this up like this. And now we have a bit, it's kind of a variable bandpass. So it kind of changes width a little bit. And we can add another point here and make this one dynamic so that we're basically boosting, but it's going to attenuate itself when it gets like too resonant. So we can map the frequency of that as well. I'll just move the frequency a little bit so I can see which one of these it is, and then adjust that to be more or less in line. Cool, so now we have like a super resonant peak, and we can also map the chain volume of this bandpass. Call it BP gain. And I'll just turn it down a bit and start sweeping around and see how that sounds. Maybe give it a bit more linear phase. So I want to adjust this range here on the dynamic so it's not ducking quite as much. Cool, so you can use that to add more formant. Another cool thing to do with this grain delay is put a gate so that it's not quite as messy. So we can use a gate to make it less messy like this. So you just set the floor to 0, release, hold, attack all to 0. We don't necessarily need any look ahead, and then it's all about setting this threshold. So we can also add a little bit more cool stuff with an additive process using like a resonator like Corpus. And I could just take the MIDI from the Moog sub and then select frequency last. And then this should follow the pitch. And again, I'm going to EQ it. So a lot of times when I'm making these sounds, I'll make them like early on in the track or in another session so that I can really use a lot of CPU with like linear phase and stuff and like dynamic EQ. Let's look. Might be nice to have some tape saturation in this. So like maybe try parallel tape saturation after the amp. And this will just add, if I push this saturation knob, it'll just add a bit of smoothness and warmth. And that doesn't have a dry wet, so I'm going to group it and then put it in a dry wet rack and just turn it down. So yeah, remember we have that knob in the phase plant where we can actually control the speed. So I could actually modulate that as well, which could be fun. Cool. So it's a really full sound, so it could be cool to do a bit of like a comb filter. Like a comb filter that's actually filtering and it's not using delay lines. Like what I'm trying to say is like a reverse or a flipped comb filter, like something that's subtracting. So there's this plugin. Let's see, what could we use? We could use Serum Effects. Serum Effects has a really nice comb filter. Oh, you know what else we could use? We could use Rift. No, let's use Serum Effects. Serum Effects is cool. So I'll just put it before that shaper and get the filter out and select flange comb minus, and then there's also comb L6 minus, HL6 minus. So anytime you see the minus, same with the flange minus, it's going to be cutting instead of boosting. So let's just try the basic comb minus. Yeah, so I'll just modulate that a little bit. So that's pretty nice. So you can really keep going on with this process, just adding more and more and getting more and more complexity, adding all kinds of different effects in parallel racks and modulating the volume of the chains and the parameters. And when you're done, you know, you can have that go through the whole song, so you can control all the layers. And then you can also bounce it out and then have a nice chunky bass sound that you can then do cool edits with. So it's fun to just kind of do some chops and reverses and stuff. Cool little glitches and stuff. And then also, if you then put this kind of loop or phrase in a sampler, you can also make some cool little edits with the sampler and the pitch bend, because the pitch bend on the sampler sounds good. So I'll just put a note at C3, and then we can go to the pitch oscillator tab and select show modulation, and then automate the pitch with the modulation. So when you use a lot of distortion and filtering, sometimes you lose sub and you gain too much in this low mids. And I find that the Pro Q, I can set it to linear phase. And then with the dynamic, just boosting the sub and attenuating the low mids, and then also just another kind of high pass on the super low sub. That kind of helps. And then also you can kind of high pass it and give yourself a little bit more room for those hats and cymbals and nice clean sounding stuff. And then a shelf on the dynamic can be kind of nice too, just adding a little bit more dynamic into the sound. Also, a little kind of subtle modulation of that super high low pass can be nice. Cool. So yeah, that's kind of my style of like, at least lately, the kind of like halftime D&B when I'm trying to lean into the D&B. You know, I got like the rim shot, got the stompy, subby, clean sounding short kick drum, tight hats. I think with the halftime, it sounds good to have a little bit more dry and tight on the high end, but like, you know, I will add in shakers and cymbals and stuff too for added energy, but kind of a similar bass flow. And yeah, love making these kind of basses with the double sub. There's, you can see that the the basses aren't really quite that loud compared to the drums. Like I'm going for more of a dynamic sound here, probably just because I'm in headphones. But yeah, that nice. There's some good dynamic in those bass sounds, which I think is good. I like myself a nice dynamic bass sound because once it gets limited, those points where it's louder will sound kind of like pushed, but then the rest will sound cleaner. Whereas if it's all a sausage before you limit it, then maybe you get less of that dynamic push limited sound. But that's just an aside. I hope you learned something about making Reese's in a whole new way. Who would have thought 2 sub basses playing at once could make such sick bass sounds? I just started doing this recently and I've been having a blast doing it. And I started doing it because I was watching some class and people were saying like, you gotta have mono subs or you gotta have like really clean subs, a single sub, just have one sub. And I was like, what happens if I break the rule? Because I've broken the rule by doing sub bass with Reese's, where I'm just like detuning 2 square waves and playing at a low octave and it sounds fine. So I checked it on the spectrum and yeah, the sub bass phase cancellation causes cool wobbles. And I love wobbles, especially Reese type wobbles. But I've kind of grown bored of the sound of like a detuned saw or a detuned square. It's still a great sound, but I think once you just start distorting 2 detuned sine waves, it sounds like such a cohesive sound, but you still have this nice rhythm to it. So, a really fun way to make basses. Try it out. Let me know what you find. Comment below and like and subscribe. And until next time, I'm Sephiros. Peace out.